I'm Steve Haugaard, former Speaker of the House. Thanks for taking the time to consider some very important information about the proposed prison expansion. Just for a little background about myself, my college degrees were in criminal justice and psychology as well as related studies. Then law school, and I was sworn in as an attorney in Sioux Falls in 1983. Early on, I worked for a judge in Sioux Falls, and we had a lot of referrals to review convictions and to do appellate work. I also accepted a lot of court-appointed cases and found them to be very interesting. And as a result, I've been at the South Dakota State Penitentiary hundreds of times, and even out to the West Farm when it was still being used. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a corrections conference in Louisiana where they have a very low recidivism rate due to the way they changed the culture within their prisons. And over the past several years, I've also had good conversations with Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick about their corrections model, which is very similar to the Louisiana model. It includes cognitive behavioral therapy, life counseling, vocational training, addiction treatment, and education, and effective parole supervision. It works. Texas now has a recidivism rate that is less than half of South Dakota's rate of convicts returning to prison. South Dakota did use many of these methods in the past, but our current approach to corrections is not working. I also served on the Minnehaha County Board of Mental Illness for over 25 years and conducted more than 2,000 mental illness hearings for Minnehaha County. Much of corrections involves mental health care and treatment. Today I'm speaking on my own behalf, but also on behalf of South Dakota taxpayers and all citizens across the state who will have some connection with the prison at some point in their life. Let me ask you this. Did you ever have a family member, friend, or a teacher who really spoke life into you? Who really saw something more in you than you thought you had to offer? Well, then you're richly blessed. And let me ask you this. Do you think that the average person in our South Dakota State Penitentiary has been nurtured during their life? Or is it likely that they had a life marked by criticism and failure? No father figure or no mother figure in their life? Do you think that any one of them wanted to find themselves in prison? But once they got there, do you think that maybe they thought, this is all I'm good for? Or, I guess I belong here because these people are just like me. Are you familiar with some of the terms used in corrections and in addiction programs? Such as stinkin' thinkin', or if you want to stay sober, change your playmates and your playground. Even Secretary Wasco said that nearly all crimes involve some type of addiction. Now, obviously, there's a component of corrections that calls for punishment, but successful corrections requires corrective thinking. Addiction counseling, GED completion, life skills training, mental health treatment, vocational skills, and so on. These all have been part of our system in some degree in the past, but in recent years, they've not been the primary focus of our investments in corrections. And recently, many of these programs have been suspended. All this is because there has been no comprehensive plan and no effective leadership for many, many years. A few years ago, the state spent $1/3 for a facilities report study to give some guidance as to what corrections facilities were available and what might be needed. The most significant statement in that entire report was found on the first page of the executive summary. It said, absent significant criminal justice reform, which is simply translated into, if you aren't going to carefully consider what's working and what is not working, if you're satisfied with the terrible recidivism rate, if you want to try to build a shiny new object to distract from the real problems, then here's a list of possible construction projects. The key to this whole issue is significant criminal justice reform. That's recidivism. The core conversation to be had in regard to corrections is to identify your true recidivism rate. That's not the typical 3-year number, but it should be identified at 3, 5, and 10-year rates. Corrections has the goal of correcting behavior, and people are placed in a penitentiary to become penitent. Key players in this assessment are those who are the pipeline for the correction system. That's juvenile courts, misdemeanor courts, circuit courts, Supreme Court. The main players in getting there are families, churches, people who become defendants, prosecutors, defense counsel, judges, probation officers, parole officers, counselors, addiction counselors, mental health services, rehabilitation specialists, education specialists. Locking them up in a shiny new building is not a solution. The main facility on the hill is older, but it's been updated with tens of millions of dollars of improvements over the years, and much of that in the past several years. Jameson, a maximum security area, is 30 years old, and one addition is less than 20 years old with the current pod design, and we just spent $8 million on a new medical unit addition and $1 million on a new front access port. Again, absent significant criminal justice reform sets the tone for this discussion. This past summer, Secretary Wasco admitted that she had never met with the Supreme Court Chief Justice or the State's Attorneys Association or the public defenders, and she had no discussion with the Attorney General or probation or parole services about these issues. Remember, that's the pipeline for individuals coming into the system. That's the key to understanding what is really needed in the long term. The main issue over the past several years has been the issue of funding for staff, the need to increase staffing without a high turnover rate, and expanding programs for addiction rehabilitation, vocational training, education, counseling, and so on. That should be the priority. That has to be the priority. In the short term, the answer to raise the wages to a point where trained law enforcement officers sign on to make a career out of working for the state correction system and reinstate programs that have been suspended over the past year or two. That alone would improve the safety of both staff and inmates. So what's the reason to move this out of Sioux Falls? The maximum security areas at the South Dakota State Pen are new, and the minimum and medium units are updated. All utilities exist in the present location. The Secretary of Corrections claims that 100 acres is needed, but the proposal shown is nowhere near 100 acres, and it appears to be about 30 acres, just like what's presently available in Sioux Falls. All support services are already in Sioux Falls. I've heard it said that failure is not an option. And I agree that the current failure of our correction system, which is the result of inattention to the recidivism rate and what causes that is not an option. Let's do this right, but it's not right to simply build an oversized, overpriced, supermax building as a one-size-fits-all solution. Again, all the needed services are already in Sioux Falls. Last year, Senate Bill 49 was presented as just a starting point for the conversation. And that induced the legislators last year to vote for this as simply a savings account. But it wasn't just a savings account, it was a spending account. Anyone with experience in state planning and projects will know that if someone wants to keep their project moving, then they'll spend as much time and money as possible to claim that it's too far along to turn back now. It was clear to anyone reading the 2024 bill that any money allocated would be to say that too much has already been spent. That's just not true, and that is not a justification for continuing to go down the wrong road. In early January, Ryan Bruner told the Lincoln County Commissioners that very thing. Too much has been spent to turn back now. Last year, the legislators were told that Senate Bill 49 would not determine location, design, capacity. That bill did not determine those issues, but it essentially did give authority to someone else to make those decisions. The claim was very deceptive. This proposed building is one-size-fits-all supermax facility. I've been at a couple of supermax prisons, and Secretary Wasco testified that the entire 7-pod facility could accommodate that supermax model, but the difference would be the number of hours that doors remain open in the various pods. So many issues have not been considered, such as, what if there's a federal legalization of marijuana? Even President Trump has said that he doesn't oppose legislation in Florida. Sentences would be reviewed and reduced, and inmates would be released. What if there's a change to our ingestion law? That alone accounts for a significant increase in prosecution and sentencing in South Dakota. Sentences would be reviewed and reduced, and inmates would be released. Like too many state projects these days, we've had a tremendous lack of transparency. Because of that, you're driven to ask a lot of questions, such as, why build a supermax prison for people who will be standing next to you in the checkout line in the next few years? Why weren't there meetings in advance across the state to receive input, especially in Lincoln County? Why was Lennox given $10.5 million when only $10 million was referenced in Senate Bill 49? Why was Senate Bill 49 presented as a savings account when in fact it was a spending account? Why not use the West Farm site? It used to be the site for many inmates and the source of much of their food. Or why not use the 28 acres across the canal from the existing penitentiary that's already owned by the Department of Corrections? Or Why not buy the 70 acres of Citibank for $32 million, where you could have vocational training, GED completion, addiction counseling, and there's a child care facility already on site. The location's perfect. There hasn't been an overall comprehensive coordinated plan for corrections for decades, and there is still no stated plan other than incarceration, with the hope that maybe we can hire people who will drive to the Lincoln County building, and then we can restart programming. There have already been excessive expenditures, so they can say, we've already spent too much to turn back now. Please don't throw good money after bad. If you don't put the brakes on this now, the building will become the corrections policy and plan for South Dakota. We already know that our recidivism rate is twice the recidivism rate of other states which are employing successful models, and our incarceration rate is dramatically higher than North Dakota's numbers. The South Dakota programs that were effective were shut down. We were told that we need to be logical versus emotional. Well, so if we apply logic, we should ask the questions, why wouldn't you take the comment of absent significant criminal justice reform as a major warning in that report? Why would you not consider a smaller West River men's prison building? Why would you make everything max security construction? Why wouldn't you just add on to the existing new building, which was designed for a second level of maximum security? Why wouldn't you consider a careful public study of what actually works in other states or other countries? Why make hiring more difficult, and why not more money into probation and parole? Stop the wasteful spending on this building. Be transparent and develop a long-term policy. Please say no and hit the pause button.